All right, so welcome to Sower Trek 24. Um, I'm just going to be introducing uh, Parable of the Sower and Sower Trek for those who haven't managed to, just really briefly, those who haven't read or watched them. Um, and I'll introduce the people here briefly as well. The way that this is going to go is the friends that I've invited to talk about these are um, are going to have a conversation first. Then we're going to have 10 minutes to write or draw or comment and just sit with what's been shared. And then we'll share back in the round. So this is a space for us to really get into what's in our heads and our hearts with this stuff because it's really juicy, quality sci-fi, these two. And they have a lot in common. So I'm interested in how we're thinking about these things, especially on this day, which is the day when Captain Sisko comes back and in time and calls it a watershed moment in the 21st century. But I'll get to that. So let's get into it. We're in conversation today with Khadija Carberry and Florence Okoye, who will introduce themselves in a moment. And if you'd like to link with them there, I've linked their Instagrams on the resource page, which I've shared already. Um, just let us know if you want to share it again. And I'm Charlotte, and Juice is co-hosting as well. Uh, this is all under the umbrella of AfroFlux today. Um, and yeah, we've we're all fans of science fiction and especially Afrofutures aesthetics. This particular event was inspired by the London science fiction research community. Which I've linked to in the resource page. So if you want to check out their work or their Facebook page or their events, you're welcome to. And I saw Florence was hosting, well, not hosting, but she was on the panel for that event. Some of the things that came up were really cool. We had a little pre-meeting, the four of us, and some of the things that came up there were again really, really cool. So some of the things on the screen, so maybe that will come up again or more things. I'd love to get into things like the role of violence to shape change. Is it inevitable? And if so, how do you get through it? How do you get through conflict and through the side? Or space exploration, yay, nay, why, how? Um, Imagination, aka delusional dreaming, came up. Um, so yeah, we'll see what we get into. So I'm just going to introduce Parable of the Sower for those who haven't had a chance to read the whole novel in the 3 days that you had the heads up that this event was happening, because I only just started really putting it out there recently. So the story opens up to the main character looking at a skyline with another character, and they say that light, progress, growth, all those things were too hot and too poor to bother anymore. They're looking at stars, and then the other character remembers a time when the city was lit up and the skyline was lit up. So it's at this point in time where we're at this point in time where we're obsessed with growth, like it's growth or death for our apparently according to our common sense in our world. But in this book, it's growth. They can't afford it, and the climate has collapsed. It's too hot to even to bother with those things that we take for absolute, necessity anymore. It's no longer a necessity. So that's how the book opens up. It's set in the scene, and that's in July 2024 is when that book opens up. That's the date in the character's diary. It's July 2024. The main character, Lauren Olumina, has a condition called hyperempathy. So whenever someone gets hurt, she feels the pain in her own body, which means it's dangerous for her to hurt people because it makes her vulnerable. And if she does have to hurt someone in self-defense, she needs to make it swift because otherwise she's going to feel it. and she lives in this gated community, which I really resonated with because my dad's always talking about like, come the day of the resolution, we'll be okay. But those gated communities ain't gonna save anyone, and that's what happens to this main character. They're thrust out, and so she goes on this journey through the book, leading a group of people for survival in this dystopian future, which starts in 2024 but goes on for a few years. Some of the things that happen in the book, which was written in the 90s, we can see today. Things like climate breakdown, like hurricanes, and droughts, like the rich going off to Mars because we've done this planet, let's move on. There's like wild dogs roaming, or only owned by middle class or rich people that can afford them, um, which we see happening in the genocide and in Gaza as well. These horrific scenes that are described in Octavia Butler's novel, we see happening in 2024. She doesn't cut corners when it comes to that. She's very real with it, and she even uh, almost predicted a demagogue like Donald Trump coming into power with the slogan "Make America Great Again," like in her next book. She even sussed that. And just to touch on just in case anyone's not savvy with the Bible, parable of the sower is a parable in the Bible about if your mind is ready to receive the message of God, if it's about the state that you're in order to receive those messages. And the character herself is has a message throughout the book. She's written Earth Seed, the Book of the Living, and she's as you go through the book, she's giving out her way she sees the world. So most famously, she writes, "The only lasting truth is change. All that you change changes you. God is change." I've just switched that around because I assume everyone's heard this, but that's like the truth of it. Um, is what her religion is, it religion, spiritual parables, what she has to say. And she also says that the destiny of Earthseed is to take root amongst the stars. So she's just like, let's start again. We're going to use up all our resources. We have used up all our resources. We have no choice but to do this. Is her aim, which leads us on to Star Trek. For those who's not got through Star Trek Deep Space Nine, we're going into the episode called Past Tense. And so two characters, the good Dr. Bashir and Captain Sisko, of whom is my child's namesake, named after the actor. They go back in time into the year today, into the year 2024, 30th of August, Friday. And it's 15 degrees. Don't know what the degrees are here, or in San Francisco, but and on that day, Sisko points out that there was a huge riot, and that riot was super violent and became a watershed moment where society started to fix their ways and become more socially just. And I couldn't help but, think of the riots that we've been seeing here in the UK recently. But they land in the slums. They land in this place where people are put, it doesn't matter if they're a criminal or not. Most of them are just poor or middle class people that are landed on their butts, and they all just get sent to one place and forgotten about for months and years, for no fault of their own. So it's a story about the people rising up against the rich, essentially, this particular episode. But what really stood out to me is the things that the characters say, which, I hear a lot of people say every now and again, like it's not that they don't give a damn, it's that they've given up. The social problems they face seem too enormous to deal with, I think is a sentiment I've heard before. And if push comes to shove, or if push comes to shove, if something disastrous happens, if we are frightened enough or desperate enough, how would we react? So a lot of the sci-fi that I see is very dystopian, and it kind of assumes that humanity is going to just go crazy and loot and take and things like that. But this doctor who comes from this peace loving resource future federation is trying to imagine reconcile with that reality. And and this is we're in the context of a lot of crises converging, like mass migration and 40 degrees Celsius summers coming up, and what that means for our food systems. What does that mean for our heat in cities? What does that mean for our basic services? These are our realities that we are going to face. And I really loved what Fazana Khan said, similar to the doctor. How do we stay together as more pressure is put on us? Who can we be under pressure other than who we have been? So she said that during rehearsing Freedoms Festival, about rehearsing the future that we want to see and that we want to be in, doing that now, which is what I love about these sci-fi and speculative fiction, is they're kind of giving us that space. And today we've got that space as well to just sort of think on that. And I just wanted to end on this is a continuation. If you keep reading Seeds of Book of the Living, Octavia Butler also says that kindness eases change. So yeah, what does that bring up? Survival of the friendliest. So that's an introduction to the book and the episode, so everyone's sort of on the same page or the same episode. I'm gonna share the resource page again just for the people who've arrived, and if you're curious about the slides are in there as well. And now I would like to invite Khadija and Florence to the floor. If you would like to if you'd like to take the stage for a minute, and then the other person can take the stage, and then you can have a conversation if you like. Yeah, cool. So I'm gonna mute myself. Any questions, please do ask them in the comments, and then we'll get back round to them. Yeah, cool. And who would like to start? Okay, Khadija or Florence. So Florence, are you happy to start?
I feel Khadija. I think it would be more appropriate for Khadija to start, given I've already done a lot of talking at the previous session. So yeah.
Wicked.
But no one else heard that though, Florence.
That's how dedicated I am to listening and not talking.
I was about to say that because, yeah, I definitely would love to hear Florence speak.
Khadija, could you lean
you hear
forward a
me?
little bit, because we can't hear you very well.
Are
If
you
you could
hearing
lean
me any
forward.
better now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm on this computer and the microphone is not great. So people would be better. Yeah, I'd love to hear Florence first, to be honest, because I'm fascinated by that talk. So I'm going to defer to Florence's incredible experience.
Okay, I'll try to Charlotte, do put notes in to me if it's like when I'm going over, or like how long you've got. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I guess this is the future. This is the future we're living in, where we kind of like keep handing it over to each other until until someone has to something happens. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Where to begin? Okay, yeah, and I'm just gonna begin with like just some general thoughts about I suppose it's kind of about everything really. So yeah, a bit of introduction, I guess, to me first. Yeah, my name is Florence. Some of you might have heard of what it's ancient history now, but there was a thing called Afrofutures UK, and that was something that like kind of co-created with some really great friends. And we were kind of really interested in like, I guess, Afrofuturism, but very much from like that like from a British perspective, because a lot of like Afrofuturism was very much from like the African American perspective. And yeah, and then we kind of, and yeah, so that's sort of like a bit of my background. And a lot of my day-to-day work, I work as a researcher, I'm a UX designer, I'm a service designer. I work a lot with digital and technology stuff, and I'm really passionate about science communication and science and like history and giving people access to archives through tech. And so a lot of my perspective on things, I think, comes from like quite a critical perspective on, say, technology and how we make stuff, but also kind of like the stories we tell ourselves about how we make stuff and how stuff gets done. And I think it's in that spirit that like um a lot of what I'll be saying in this talk will be coming from, or in this session will be coming from. So like and let me just share my screen very quickly, because just to make it worth the fact that like I actually did even try to make like some slides. Yeah, so I guess I've got this concept, thanks to our really amazing conversations actually with with Khadija, with Charlotte, with Juice. And it was kind of a riff off the whole thing about delusional dreaming. And it got me think, it kind of helped me encapsulate what I actually think about this stuff, which is kind of delusional realness. And we'll get into why. And basically it comes down to, what does it actually take to make stuff happen, like to make the futures we want happen? We often use words like dreaming, like hope, or kind of these really beautiful poetic words, which is lovely. It might be a bit of me being slightly neurospicy or maybe a bit contrarian, but sometimes I think like it's not so much that it does ourselves a disservice, but I feel like sometimes it means that we can almost like avoid kind of like really analyzing what often is actually going on, even when we're talking about, you know, like dreaming or you know, like optimism or hope or whatever. Because one of the things, if you'll pardon the spelling mistake, one of the things that always comes back to me about like the Parable series is the fact that like actual real stuff had to happen for Earthseed to work, right? So Lauren starts off with this dream about like ultimately humanity's end goal, it should be amongst the stars, which I mean, there's a lot to critique there. Like it's very interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into this a lot later. It's really interesting that in many ways, like that's still quite a colonialist, quite a colonialist ideal. Even the means of getting there is still quite, you know, quite imperialist, you know, having to create like spaceships. Again, to kind of half quote myself or half quote others, you know, there's nothing in the parable books that indicates that the means of production or capitalism or anything has actually ended. So in order to create those spaceships, in order to create that technology which Earthseed needs to fulfill humanity's like change-driven destiny, still requires all the current systems, right? It still requires the rare earth minerals that would have been dug up from the Congo or from Uruguay, Venezuela, or from the one mountain in China that has a particular form of lithium that you need for your particular kind of batteries. And kind of similarly in the Star Trek episode, I'll be honest, I'm maybe a bit of an like a kind of a very critical admirer of Star Trek, because I often think like there's a lot about Star Trek that really betrays a lot of the kind of like liberal idealism and liberal and when I say idealism, I'm not really talking about like necessarily like optimism or something that's against practicality. I'm kind of using it in a bit more of a political sense, wherein there's often this idea about like how we like the big ideas in the world or the big concepts are things that are kind of outside of humanity and aren't things that actually are very much dependent on the way humanity interacts with the environment. Like there's no inherent or inevitable future. What we're seeing is our emergent qualities, right? And that's something like even in the like I really love the quotes that Charlotte shared, because even those about, you know, sort of when Sisko says, you know, or sorry, when the other captain or the other, I think the medic is like, how did this happen? And Sisko kind of gives like that particular spiel. And as someone who comes very much from like a Black socialist tradition, you know, that actually is, you know, that quote from Cisco is actually incredibly problematic, because it's much like it's actually avoiding the reality that, you know what, these systems are actually made often by a minority of people who happen to have a certain amount of power, and they get a certain amount of power and clout in particular ways. They use particular mechanisms, whether through religion, whether through imperialism, whether through colonialism, those kind of like very generic statements like, oh, well, humanity was just over. Like, who are we talking about humanity? Even in today's, when we're actually looking around ourselves and we're making these kind of grand statements, like, it's fine to just say these things off the cuff, of absolutely, and that's just how we feel. But if we're being really real about how analyzing what's actually going on, time and time again, you find that it's not some like inherent, oh, humans are just selfish, or humans are just too good, or humans are just, all of this kind of like wishy-washy, really vague, kind of like nebulous phrases aren't really particularly helpful when it comes to analysis, when often you find that, you know what, there's often actually very specific actors who use very specific means and methods to get very specific things happening, right? And that's something I'm probably always going to keep coming back to when it comes to stuff like Star Trek, because I feel, you know, that those are sort of like, they're such sort of narratives that we often hear about when we're talking about this stuff, right? Like, and I think it's really important for us who are serious about like community-centered futurisms and new ways of doing and being. Like, I think it is actually very important for us to also critique these very easy statements. They're beautiful and they're poetic, but they're too easy, and often they're not particularly true either. But even in that episode, right? Even in that episode, Captain Cisco at some point realizes that there is no inevitability to history. There is no inevitability to how things just happen. Like, humanity eventually will find, no, you actually have to get your hands dirty. And in fact, he actually kind of really does get his hands dirty, certainly in the second episode. So again, it's like, yeah, so when we're talking about like, you know, when we talk about dreaming, is it actually, I think that's the big hypothesis, or whatever, the big statement for tonight I'm going to say is like, are we really talking about delusional dreaming? Is it actually delusional? Or is it more the case that like we're in a particular complicated system, and there are particular things therefore that have to happen, and even if they might sound delusional or sound big or scary, that's actually how reality works. So I'm just going to leave like these two images. So this is like a Polynesian sea map, and I guess for me, what it represents is again the kind of things that, like, if you were someone like in the 1600s, in like say in one of the islands of the South Pacific, it may well have sounded really, really in like a delusional dream if someone was talking about, okay, well, we need to get to this other place. There are other places that we need to find, whether to find our new destinies, whether to get more resources or whatever. But like, that is just, there's just simply a reality to it. The ocean is big, you know, but you know how the ocean works. And so even if even if it might sound so big, like there's only one way of getting across it. And they found ways of getting across it, and they found ways of communicating this. As I said, this is an example of the kind of maps that would be created to because of the way that they navigated the oceans. And so again, like, that's something that we see continuously through history. Is it so often, you know, it's easy to call things like someone had a hope or a dream, but actually quite often, and again, maybe it's just the neurospiciness in me talking, so often the thing that's taken as metaphor by others actually often isn't metaphor. It's like, well, that's just how reality is. If reality works in a certain way and you want to achieve a certain thing, you have to do that thing. If it seems too big, well, sucks to you. That's just the reality that we happen to live in. Again, is it actually delusional dreaming, or is it not simply understanding and taking the universe seriously and moving with it? Another example, and this is again just a second image, it comes from the use of like fractal mathematics when it came to a lot of like particularly central, but also West African architecture, right? If you have a particular understanding of the way that people in your community or in your homestead interact with each other, you of course build to either enable certain connections or indeed to disable certain connections. You know, like architecture is still a means of power. So again, is it simply prettiness? Is it a dreaming? Is it mythology? Or is it not simply an understanding that, for example, if you're in a polygamous society, you want the wives to get on with each other, you want the children of the wives to get on with each other? Is it not simply a fact of social physics that you will build in a particular way to ensure that people can still get access to the resources they need in ways that they're not always jumping over each other, arguing with each other, you know, misbehaving with each other, and still working together for that, you know, for the bigger goal of the survival of the community? Again, is it actually delusional dreaming, or is it not like delusional realness? So yeah, that's the thing that I think we'll keep coming back to throughout this talk and throughout the session, which I'm sure is going to be really, really amazing. Like when we're using these big words, like what is it actually that we're really talking about? What is it actually that we're really getting into? And what is it that maybe we're avoiding saying as well? Like I think I may well say a lot that's very harsh about kind of very traditional, what I would consider liberal analysis of history or society. And well, I mean, I think it's fine to be harsh because it's kind of like it's the dominant system, so why not get into it? But in many ways, what I'm trying to do is actually just really encourage us to find structures of thinking that will help us make the futures that are actually needed. That we, you know? So yeah, again, is it actually delusional dreaming, or is it not simply a question of reality and how we confront it and deal with that reality? And I went slightly over, but thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And reminds me of something Kate Raworth said, which I'm paraphrasing, but she said that even though it's big and complex, it doesn't go away. Like all the things, it's so whether you ignore it or not, it's still going to be there. And we've still got to be honest about it. And I think that's kind of the call of our time, is be honest with yourself and with the context that we're in. And I love that it's a critical analysis admirer of Star Trek and even Octavia Butler's character, Lauren Alamina, the main character, because she's talking about going to space. But yeah, how? How? you know, I love that they've provided these fictional spaces in order that we can have these conversations in the first place. So what? So yes, and yes. Khadija, are you happy to take the stage as well? And I should mention as well, I met Florence at through AfroFutures UK, I believe, or it was through comics. It was through comics that I met Florence. Yeah, LD Comics. So yeah, I'm very happy that we're still doing this together. And Khadija I met through Civic Square where I work, and I referenced them in the presentation. They're one of the links I wrote because they've done a lot of rigorous work into the reality of what a 3-degree neighborhood will actually look like. So that they are taking the complexities, taking the bigness of it, taking the reality of it, and they're penning it down, and they're making it available for everyone to really get into it. I've put the link in I'll share the resource page again for the latecomers, but or the newcomers, what is time? Yeah. So please feel free to share resources as well that you have, or links to your work, so we can keep this conversation going even beyond this space. Cool. All right. Khadija, you happy to dance?
Hello everyone. I don't know if you can hear me better now. I fixed my audio challenges. So thank you so much for that, Florence. I actually don't have slides. So I'm just going to talk through and really reflect on many of the points that Florence made, which is almost a continuation of the conversation we previously had. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I work with sound, audio, sound and audio, the same thing, film. I also run a project called Generous Waste, where we begin to reimagine possibilities through waste. And I do a lot of my work is grounded in snapshots into exploring the geopolitical histories and the supply chains that affect the world that we live in today, or shape the world that we live in today. I think I'm very much reacquainting myself with Deep Space Nine. I realized that was the Star Trek that was of my childhood when I started back looking at some of the episodes. And I just kind of was really fascinated by the projections into 2024 that also, of course, are mirrored in Parable of the Sower. And one of the things that I wanted to raise as I was looking at it, and a lot of people are talking about the very prophetic nature of these two different storylines, the fact that they're almost predicting this future. And it's something that I was really thinking about, and I was thinking about it through the lens of mathematics previously, because I grew up understanding that mathematics was essentially the study of pattern. It was a way of unlocking the patterns that existed in the creation. And when we begin to look at the patterns of history, I think they're very clear timelines and they're very clear patterns that will manifest. And if we look at systems that are based upon infinite growth, that are based upon utter total convenience at whatever cost, I mean, what the natural conclusion is what would have been predicted in 2024, because it's impossible to sustain that type of society and that utterly extractive infrastructure. So then I kind of was also thinking about like the illusion of safety and stability, that even within this crumbling 2024 of Parable of the Sower, where the ecological collapse has happened, where the social collapse has happened, where imperialism and capitalism are still reigning freely with even less, I don't know if there are any controls now, but less control. Somehow, people are still convinced that they will be safe and stable within a gated community, somehow within this world. That's something that I find utterly fascinating and very much mirrored in today's world as we see genocides, literal genocide being live streamed on our phones. And somehow we're still able to kind of default to the idea that we will have safety and stability if we fix just a little bit of the system and the structure. We haven't reckoned with the fact that we are in a time of utter collapse and in the birth of transformation. And that something that is built upon the extraction of everything at whatever cost is not something that we should be seeing as safe, seeing as stable, and seeing as something that can carry us into the future and future generations. So I think this is another thing that I find most fascinating when I read Parable of the Sower, was this thing of the cyclicality of impulse in history. History, it's as if history it's cycling and it's repeating, but every single time something gets added on and it seems to be magnifying and the collapse becomes even larger. And as I was reading Parable of the Sower, and I was like, seems like utter collapse, then you realize that even within that collapse, another collapse was possible because of this idea of stability within that collapsing entity. I think I'm kind of just going through the ideas that really came to me. And the other thing that really struck me, which I think is the thing that has attracted so many people to Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, is the fact that it is so grounded within the experience of the global majority, if you want to call it that, living within diaspora. It's so grounded within that. So when you begin, so it's not far off. It doesn't take a lot of projection for us to imagine that context as being incredibly real, because so enough of it is real. And that was the grittiness of it that I really appreciated. I love like Brave New World. I love 1984. I love particularly love those two novels. And then and I was still struck at how much I could see myself walking the path of Lauren or Lamina somehow, and how relative it felt. The other interesting thing as I'm going along, I was talking about delusional dreaming, and this is something very interesting. I love the connection that Florence has made between whether is it really delusional dreaming or is it the delusional realness. And for me, I come from a spiritual tradition in which we see the world as an emerging event. It's something that emerges out of an unseen, and so the dreams and that kind of ethereal matter, that is almost the unseen space in which the real emerges. And so it is the creating of that space in which people feel that they're able to radically dream and reimagine, or the context that forces people into that space of utter reimagination and dreaming is that space where I truly believe we have the catalyst of transformation. But even within that incredible catalyst of transformation that Lauren drives and brings, she is still rooted within this construct of imperialism, which is this other ephemeral structure that when we lift it out of the physical structures and infrastructures and governances in our world, it's a way in which we relate and make meaning when we look at the world. And so in order for Lauren to take these people on a journey, she creates a religion that can be tied to a neo kind of imperialistic structure that's rooted in transformation and change. And in order to take them on that journey, she inspires them through, let's go and colonize the stars for this type of utopia. And so I remember being incredibly disappointed at the end of the book. But then I had to really reflect upon the realness of Octavia Butler. And I think, I don't know, I think maybe this will be my last point before we round up. So, yeah. And then I kind of was looking at Octavia Butler, where she grew up in Pasadena. She didn't move around very much. She was very much rooted in that community, which was, again, one of those smaller cities or towns in America, very much like where I live in Burton and Trent in the Midlands, which had thriving industry, which has died. And so resources are redirected from the city. And then also there was this incredible racial divide that was just implicit in the city. And also in her experience of her mother going and cleaning in mainly white households and being treated really badly and things like that. So it was also it's this space of dreaming and imagining through Parable of the Sower, but it's also really grounded within a real experience. And I think the thing that really brought it to me, or really made me get to talking to Charlotte about Parable of the Sower, was I was on Instagram and I was reading about somebody that they had to sleep on the street because they had to relocate again in Huzza. And they were scared because of the wild dogs. The wild dogs were attacking them. And they were kind of commenting on the fact that these animals were beloved pets at one point. And now they're scavengers that will, they're hungry and they're looking for food. And so it just reminded me of that vision of the wild dogs in Parable of the Sower carrying a human arm or body part, kind of, because the infrastructure is completely broken down. Safety has broken down, yet still somehow people find safety in places. It's very interesting. So yeah, I think those are the types of things that I found really, really quite interesting throughout. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Khadija. I love the reminder of how grounded and real Octavia is, like, with her work. Like, even when you read her work, it's like you're in the minds of the characters. That's what I felt. Like, all her characters are like that. She really works things out really pragmatically and really realistically. And because they're usually Black main characters, they've usually gone through shit. Like, they're usually, gone through a hard time, and then they have the resources to cope, like, with this new change or this new reality or this new kind of collapse or this new transformation, because they're grounded in their own context of, this person has cancer, one of the characters in one of her books. And for Lauren, she's got this hyper empathy, and yeah, she's in this dystopian landscape and she has to work things out. And I didn't know that Octavia was from a small town with resources that had been taken from it and put somewhere else as well. So again, it just grounds it. And yeah, so this conversation has kind of been circling this idea of what is real, like really real, is what I'm hearing here, which is interesting because of course we're in an imagination space when it comes to these stories. So from that depth, we're bringing it out. So it's nearly 7 o'clock. So for 10 minutes, I'm gonna say 10 minutes. I'm going to just let your playlist play, get a pen, get a paper, or comment on this Zoom call, draw, write. I'd love to hear back from all the participants here in the round, but I want to give you some space to just sort of sit with what's been shared. I've shared the because I think that's always a thing that I miss out on when it comes to Zoom calls. Like it's the focus is on the speakers, but in the spirit of AfroFlux, where everyone's no one's a pro here. Like Khadija or Florence, they are not like the experts on what they're sharing. They're just people I admire who have some really excellent perspectives on things that I personally wanted to hear from. And I now personally want to hear from the people who have taken time out of their Saturday to Friday, their Friday to be here. I genuinely want to hear from you. And I imagine everyone here, I want to hear from you as well. So yeah, do some writing. Everyone's a pro here. Yes, yes. Yes, Joshua. So write, draw, comment. So the next 10 minutes, put your playlist on or sit quietly for a minute. I'd love to hear what's coming up for you. And I will be spending this 10 minutes just adding it onto the resource page, what I've heard come up so far. Cool. And then we'll share back in the round. All right. Any questions as well, please feel free to get them down. So yeah, see you in 10 minutes. And then we'll just then you're safe to unmute so we're not treading everyone's toes. But yeah, feel free to share what's coming up for you, or even it doesn't have to follow on from what's been said either. It can just be what came up for you when you read Parable of the Sower or watched that episode of Star Trek or Star Trek in general, and how it relates to 2024, because that's what really stood out to me. It was the fact that these two pieces of fiction were imagined in the 90s, but they were set this year, and how it relates to what's going on. I kind of whizzed through the presentation, but there was quite prophetic. There definitely some parallels to be seen.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I had made some notes and it's a bit of a brain dump. And I feel like as I was typing, like one idea was then contradicting the next and then contradicting the next. So I'm not sure how much this is going to make sense. But I think I was thinking about the points that were made about Lauren Olamina using sort of colonialism and imperialism to try and seek something better, and using neo-imperialism to kind of like mobilize these followers, and then also potentially it wasn't really clear in the book or in the story, it was said that how the ship was going to be built and things like that, but it was making me think how that translates to change in in our reality at the moment, because I think that it's very difficult when you're in, like, we're products of our environment through nature, so it's very difficult to kind of like sever yourself from the systems which we're trying to resist, because in so many ways they're fundamental to us just being alive. So I think that that's kind of like, that connects to our, you know, our fundamental survival, but also it just makes me think, like, how far can you dream beyond what is so fundamental to you when you're created by it? And then you know, I guess that led me to kind of wonder about, there's always this kind of responsibility for this kind of like responsibility in a story for someone to be a change maker, or for a group of people to be change makers, but perhaps it can only be done through generations, because the hope would be that each generation has a bit less of the is a bit less shaped by the problems that we're trying to resist, and eventually you can get to a point where, I don't know what that end point looks like, because we're always going to have things that we're trying to resist be like a fundamental part of our history and our background. So I guess that's kind of where I got to, where I was like, how can you sever yourself from the systems that you're trying to resist, but not kind of like sever yourself in such a way that you can't survive enough to do anything about it, and still be unreliant on them enough that you can do something about it. It just seemed like a bit of like a cycle that I couldn't quite figure out, but that's where I got to.
I love what you how you said maybe it's the work of generations, and how can we separate ourselves from, I've definitely had that thought. In the same breath that I'm going one down Babylon, I'm also like, you know, happy that they kept my sister alive, you
Right.
know, she went in, and you know, and like you said, so it is. And I've just had a child myself, and I am thinking it's incremental, you know, they're getting an education or resources or a value system and priorities different from the one I was raised in. And that's going to keep on keeping on, you know, because they're in a different context and we're more aware in different ways. So it does feel incremental. And yeah, how can you really truly like imagine beyond it and believe it even? You know, imagining is one thing, believing it is quite another. Living it is another. um That's brilliant insights. Thank you. If anyone wants to bounce off that, please feel free to. But Camilla, you also had your hand up, so feel free to, yeah.
Peace. Thank you. I love what everybody is bringing up. Some of the thoughts that I was having, especially when I saw what gosh, what was their name? Florence was bringing up about like recognizing patterns and things of that nature. It made me think about Black quantum futurism. I don't know if any of you guys are have ever heard of, but it's like a collective out of Philadelphia in the United States. And they deal a lot with talking about like how Black people, how we relate to time, and not just like kind of in the mystical sense of like the future and things like that, but also in the sense of like, how do we engage with time based on, you know, living in bodies that have like DNA that has been, you know, that is like oppression within our DNA and all of these things like that. And so it was just making me think about like when we think about like futurism in the future, and even just like the contradictions between like how do we, you know, destroy the systems that are actively killing us in order to create these futures and things like that, and what that will look like. I just really related to what Florence was saying about the fact that it's like it's not going to be a pretty picture. Like it's going to look like a lot of people being sacrificed that don't like consent to being sacrificed. It's going to look like us having to you know, resort to things that are so-called delusional in order to like take care of one another, you know, as we are actively building these futures. And it also made me think about something that I recently read about, which is basically like a mix between kind of like Blackness and the idea of like accelerationism, which is like that tech thing, you know, that acceleration just to the point of where we just finally get to the end of capitalism by just pushing it as far as it can go. And it was basically talking about like how the way that that theory doesn't really take into account the way that Blackness factors into that, like how Blackness is a form of capital that kind of like already exists in that space, and how like Black people have already kind of contended with the fact that in order for like basically like for us, we're invested in the end of the world as we know it, because that would mean the end of, you know, our um what's the word I'm looking for? That would mean like the end of like our oppression, so to speak. So yeah, my thoughts were kind of all over the place, but yeah, I just did want to share that.
I loved we're invested in the end of the world as we know it. People. Those are strong words. And I'm wondering, when you mentioned we're going to be asking people to be sacrificed or make sacrifices without giving consent, made me think of that there's so many people that, all systems, organizations, that we're going to have to hospice, that we're going to have to compost, like we're going to have to announce you're not useful anymore. In fact, you're actively, you know, causing trouble. Let's wind down now. Let's quietly, my uncle always said, eat the fish, spit out the bones, kind of thing. Like, take what's useful, discard the rest. But yeah, that word sacrificed for the future spoke to me as well. And but without their consent, like what does that look like? Yeah, so I have some more notes, but that stood out to me there, and I can see Anton nodding his head. So please feel free to unmute and share your views.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you
All
now.
right, I'm pulled over. I'm back in Pasadena, so you know, right down the street from where Octavia Butler was there. First of all, I want to say this is all just incredible conversations. And I mean, to Florence, Naomi, and Camila's point, you know, I always, when I think about science fiction in particular, and I want to thank you guys for bringing up this Deep Space Nine episode, because I wasn't aware of that, and that through line. Because in reading Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, you know, I enjoy the stories, but I also think about, like, you know, where was the author and what was happening in the author's world when, you know, when all this was happening. And at least for those of us, I'm from Pasadena. I was born in Pasadena, and so for those of us who are here, you know, right before, right before, while she was writing the book, there was an uprising. The Rodney King, for those of you in America, you know, the Rodney King uprising relating to a man who'd been pulled over and got severely beaten by the police. And there was all kinds of, you know, and when the police were acquitted, you know, there was all kinds of rioting and things. And so when you see these things happening, and you think, you know, it's the end of the world, you know, things are breaking, and, you know, and if you're an optimist, and I believe that that Ms. Butler was an optimist, you're like, okay, well, what good is going to come from this breaking, and from, you know, what are the bones, to use your metaphor of, you know, when you spit out the fish bones, what's good's going to come out of it? And yeah, and the riots did go on and on and on, and so it was like, and it was very impactful here in LA when I was fresh out of college when it happened, and I was on the other side of town, so not here in Pasadena, but I had to come home. I'm like, wait, the freeways have stopped, and, you know, what's going to happen to the walled community? And, you know, the people who were in walled communities who thought they were going to be like really, you know, who were like, oh, that's not going to really affect us, and they're like, well, wait, shit, maybe it will, you know, that whole thing. And so I could see how that was very much echoed in her work. And then on top of that, before Parable of the Talents, came out. There was also a major earthquake here in Southern California, the Northridge earthquake in 1994. And so, and so that was incredibly impactful because all of a sudden, freeways once again are like falling down, and people are like, okay, am I gonna? I mean, people like talking about like how they had to walk home, and so all of a sudden, when she's talking about walking up the Interstate 5 freeway, we're kind of like, okay, that was all pretty real, in terms of how it felt, in terms of the dystopia and what's going to come of it. And the whole thing about imperialism and everything else, and still using the mechanisms of imperialism, that was a new thought for me. That's going to be something I'm going to ruminate on for quite a bit. So, but it's just very interesting just to see her echoing out. And I imagine, a lot of, we're here not too far from Hollywood. That's where I was when I got on the Zoom. But a lot of the writers, I would imagine, for Deep Space Nine were also in Southern California for the Rodney King riots, and for the Northridge earthquake and for things like that. And so they were there and both those things, if you were here in Southern California, you did not fail to be impacted by both those events. And so I can't help but think that also echoed out into their writing and into their storytelling. And so that's why it's interesting that they place that, relatively near, geographical grounding, exactly. Funny enough, one last thing, and I'll pass the mic on to someone else. Interestingly, we had a chance to go to our local bookstore, as I said in the chat, called Octavia's Bookshelf, and it's actually right there on the street near one of the boulevards she mentions in some of her short stories. I mean, she didn't drive. She was well known for not driving, and so she took the bus. And I mean, truly, I have to think that the bus stop that we were all looking at was one of the ones she probably took, because we were right there near her neighborhood. So, really very much grounded. So, I'll be quiet. I got a lot more I could say, but I'll stop for now.
Very happy to hear from someone from the place where Butler was, like at the bus stop that she was at and stuff like that. And love the context you gave as well, and especially what you said about it feels like the end of the world, because we've had a minute a couple of years ago with COVID when it really did feel, walking down the highways and everything overgrown and the shops closed and there's no food, like no toilet roll. Don't know about where you were, but it felt like, okay, it's now. This is the moment.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. And also how the writers of both those fictions were projecting what they were feeling at the time into their fictions. That's the beauty of sci-fi, isn't it? Like sci-fi is uniquely able to hold those those feelings and those fears and play with them, which is why I love sci-fi. Or any sci-fi and fantasy, but sci-fi in particular. Yeah, great. Were there any other hands that I can't see, or anything else that anyone wants to share or even respond to? Because we've had some thought, and also just to say thank you for sharing so far, Naomi, Camila, and Anton, because it's takes courage to share in a room of strangers, or people that you don't know or maybe even can't see. So thank you very much. I'm learning a lot here and really appreciate that in you.
I just wanted to share my own little thoughts about just how, we all here, we're all nerds, we're all into some type of speculative fiction, sci-fi or something, otherwise we wouldn't have been here, whether we're Star Trek fans, Octavia Butler fans or not. There's something else that we're into. And in that regard, I was thinking of, there's no answers here, it's just thoughts. I was just thinking of yesterday, because today is so important in these two timelines. And obviously the idea of the multiverse and everything, there's so many timelines, or both. And one of the timelines was yesterday was the day that Skynet started to become far more active and self-aware, within the Terminator lineage of variable timelines. And I was just thinking of, there's somewhere in the middle between Doomsday and this utopia, because utopia means no place. So utopia, by definition, can never exist. So it's a bit, it's that dreaming again. But I was wondering, somewhere in between the world's ending, the Bible is telling you the world's ending, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the world's going to end, the world's going to end. I was wondering how many, as you mentioned, COVID, how many timelines we've already been through in our physical lives where we've survived the end of the world. I mean, I grew up in the Cold War was going to end everything, and the Russians were going to be here, and we were told, sit under the table if a nuclear attack happens, and your teacher's going to do this, and we were shown films of what's going to happen. And there was a classic film, When the Wind Blows, that we saw an old couple slowly die in an animated film, which was, you learn that about that in school, how you're going to get ill from radiation sickness and everything. We survived that, There's been other Cold Wars continually happening, but every day we survived that. So I was just putting that out there. How many ends of the world have you survived yourself?
Especially if you're descendant from the continent. Yes. Just to say, there's been some things that have been shared as well, some links. They'll all be on the resource page that I've shared. I'm keeping tabs. If you refresh it, you'll be able to see the new things I've added. And I'll share the link again. All right, Florence. Oh, okay. Florence got there first.
Oh no, okay, Khadija, you go first. No, you have to go first now because you made me go first. So
yeah, she that's true. It's true, Khadija.
Going back, okay. I think it was just some points I was reflecting on. First, I think Naomi's point. And that is, I think we ended our conversation with that contradiction when we were thinking about this. Well, at least I ended with that contradiction. Can we truly step out of the thinking of empire? Can we really root it out of ourselves within our lifetime? Is it possible? And every time I have that conversation or I try to reason through that, I end up in these huge kind of spaces of contradiction. Because that is the context that we are in, and it definitely gives birth to us. So something that I've been thinking about a lot, because I work with my dad a lot, and one of the things that we've been talking about is overgrowing as a way of thinking, as a way of us imagining, of a way of us existing within the context, but not deferring to it for our, no, it's not a good way of putting it, for us existing within the context and building community and building structures around us that envision and embody the world that we truly are dreaming of, and the world that we know will take us into this safer and just space where we can all thrive mutually. And so it's something we've been thinking about, so that we're not embodying that act of contradicting the system, being against the system or being for it. We're existing within it as we need to exist, but we're building this thing. And that keeps thriving, it keeps growing, and it eventually overgrows and loses a contextual need for this imperial context. And so that's something that happens over time. I mean, it's something we've been thinking about quite a lot. So that's something that's just the reflection I wanted to throw out there. But I think the contradiction is inescapable. It's almost like part of being human. There's always a contradiction in every age that we explore and we read about, and people sometimes overcome or they don't overcome. And we often imagine that overcoming happening in one year or something, but it really happens over generations, and it comes to this climax at a particular moment. And that's often what's recorded. And then also thinking about like the distinctions between reality and dreaming. I always find that really fascinating. I came out of, I studied a lot of classical literature, and this was always a question, especially looking at classical literature from a very Eurocentric perspective. And I know it's probably sits within that, we think it sits within that European tradition, but Europe, as the context we understand it, came into existence way after much of like, especially Greek literature came into being. So if when we're looking at it through this very Eurocentric perspective, we try to create this incredible distinctions between dreams and reality, or fiction, fact and fiction, or unreal and real. But when we look at many of the traditions that we come from, at least when I think about the tradition I come from, with my grandmother, she would have dreams and she would have visions, and sometimes sometimes these things would happen. And so I always grew up not really seeing this harsh distinction between the world of dreams and the world of the real. I just saw that one was tangible to me and another world was not as tangible, it was much more ephemeral. So I think that I'm always curious what happens when we begin to lose those hard lines between real, the imaginary, and dream. What if we see them as worlds that sit beside each other and interact and feed into each other? And some of it is just not within that clear intellectual kind of conception of the world. That's just something that I kind of wanted to throw out there. Like, part of it seems counterintuitive to begin blurring the lines between the boundaries, but as we continue to imagine, dream, and manifest the world that we want, we have to begin challenging these really hard lines, because binaries are definitely a thing of empire. I think that's just what I wanted to,
Yeah, no, thank you. And I definitely, when I'm trying to decolonize the way I see things, I definitely count dualism, like seeing things as black and white and yes and no, and labeling and putting them apart as part of that way of seeing. And I'm trying to just check myself, like, hang on, where's that from? You know, what world did I drink from to assume that's true? I hear that one.
Yeah, it's actually really fun, because that's literally what I was also gonna say. Because for me, like if I'm actually, being absolutely, whilst I talked about delusional realness, that's another way, that's another way of thinking about it. That's a provocation. But like, I mean, if we're honest, there isn't really any difference. And in fact, I was going to put this in one of the comments, and I might still put it in a comment, but I might also just like, and I'll just say it. Yeah, because dreams are reality. And, we have to remember that, for example, when we're talking about dualism and we're talking about and also the other kind of the systems we currently are in right now, for example, are in themselves started off as a dream. The systems that white supremacy started off as a dream, race started off as a dream. All of these things are concepts and constructs that were created, and then created realities, right? So and so there isn't really a difference, and I think that's also why I kind of even the term delusional dreaming, delusional realness, like it's because the dream and the realness, they're the same thing, right? They're absolutely the same thing. And it was actually also really fun. I know it's literally like everything you were saying was literally exactly what I was going to say, because even when you were talking about overgrowing, exactly was literally going to say that, because coming from a background of like the sciences, I guess, and being really interested in like mathematics and complex systems. One of the things that's always really fascinating is like the way systems change and the way they shift. And they change because new dynamics are added, actually. So in the same way as like a sound wave never technically dies away fully, because it is a vibration, and that's not simply like a new agey hippie, that's like a literal physical fact of matter, and it's something that's used. It's what helps airplanes, so it's what makes things electricity, it makes things actually work as we know it. But then maybe there are frequencies that you can't hear, right? I'm always going to be funny when it comes to white hippies, because I feel like they were, bless her, some of them were great, some of them just left a whole bunch of like unhelpful legacies, but never mind. And yeah, so if you wanted to model like history, or if you wanted to model social dynamics on a graph, like cut time, and what you often see is that, and again, it might seem like a contradiction, but yeah, systems can behave in one way for quite a long period of time, but as a result of those very same rules, can in and of themselves suddenly shift. Like that again is pure reality. You see it like on graphs, you see it like it's just a way of the universe, that the same things that can make something behave in one way can also make it behave in another way at a certain point of time, and then after another period of time behave in a certain different way. And it's all, so the system can create new dynamics. But yes, obviously, in order to check if we're acting on a system, that's how you do it. So yeah, overgrowing, adding those new dynamics, adding those new vibrations, adding those new tunes, adding those new mechanics. I will say, I also, just to, maybe to try to be because I feel it's only fair as the person who was talking about, like, say the realities, that the political realities of Earthseed, as we see at the end of the two books. I think it's probably, maybe it's slightly easier for me to say that kind of stuff, because I think it also helps to remember that, like, and this maybe is where that the realness comes in, is it never hurts to try to get into the complicatedness without trying to like use, oh, it's complex, like, actually, could Earthseed could have worked without being imperial. Actually, that could have happened. It would have taken longer, but it could have happened. Lauren could have created cooperative minds in Congo. Lauren could have, generation after generation after generation, made sure. So again, it's not, I if it helps, I'm not coming from the perspective that I might say, oh, whilst there are obviously things that came out of humans, they're not inherent. I don't necessarily think we're necessarily inherently colonialist or inherently imperialist. We make particular decisions, and we always have done. I think, again, that's one of the great lies of liberal and historical analysis, that often talks about these things as though they're like these inherent things that we just go, like, no, when you actually get into the history, there often is actually quite, it's shocking how common it is, because it sounds like a conspiracy theory, and it really isn't, but it's shockingly common that often there are one or two people who have made very concrete decisions to do and to make systems in a certain way. None of this, very little of this stuff, is actually about our inherent humanity or inherent conditions. So I hope that, certainly for me, I don't know if that will help, but certainly that's kind of, maybe that's my way of, maybe it's just me trying to cope with the contradiction, but I do genuinely think that it's not necessarily about, oh, are we all, always going to have these bits of the system? Yes, but not in a way that I think is harmful, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to even think of anything outside the system, right? I think there's something about, when it comes to, I actually think what Octavia Butler is doing, much like I will also say Mallory Blackman in one of her other books, but that would be a whole other session. I actually think she's being really clever and savvy, and showing that actually what you're seeing in Lauren, again, is that the specific choices that Lauren made. Actually, this isn't about inherent, there's nothing inherent to space travel, there's nothing inherent to technology that had to be built using the same current systems. Those are actual specific choices, and indeed Lauren does, she's honest about that, actually, throughout, certainly in the talents. She's very honest about the tactics she gets her followers to use to survive. She's very honest. She's not, she doesn't lie about it. She's made specific choices. So if that helps us maybe deal with some of the questions about like inherency, I hope it does. But yeah, so that's fundamentally, dreams are reality. We're living in a world of dreams, or certain dreams that became real, and why not? Why then can't other dreams also become real? Because they're all real, they're all living together, there's no difference. And yes, completely 100% with Khadija about the overgrowing, about the adding new dynamics, about the nature of the kind of work that's required. And yeah, my final point is just like, yeah, don't believe the hype, don't just believe the story. It doesn't hurt sometimes to kind of get into those details, and avoid those kind of, again, quite white supremacist liberal narratives about inherency or whatever like that. A lot of the stuff are about particular choices, right, that are made. But yeah, that's all from me.
That's brilliant. Because we've been talking about systems, I do want to share something that I saw about systems that really spoke to me. Donella Meadows' leverage points. Hang on, I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Because I got it up while you were talking. I hope you can see it. Yeah, so she talks about how to change a system, you if you have a stick long enough, basically you can shift the world. Like your leverage point long enough, you can shift the world. So she talks about these different leverage points, and the leverage point that is the most effective is paradigm shift. So it's pointing to people that are already changing the shift. Sorry, I've got my child here and he's very distracting. But essentially believing that a shift is possible is the thing that can shift the system most effectively, and that it can happen in a moment, and as long as that possibility is open. I think that is kind of relevant to what you were saying. I love hearing how dreams are reality, and I'm curious about the delusional part. Like we've been saying delusional dreaming, delusional realness throughout. The delusional part I find interesting, because is that speaking to this moment in time where we're saying these things, but we're coming up against resistance, like we're coming up against people who are kind of treating us like Cassandras, like and therefore we feel delusional, like we almost feel like we're going crazy.
I mean, I can't help. I mean, in a way, yes. I mean, mind you, because I was just riffing with delusional realness, just riffing. But yeah, I mean, it's like even there's something really fascinating to me about things that, and again, is it neurospiciness, whatever it is, I don't know. But there's something so fascinating, and I've heard it from so many people. When, again, even with Butler, we were just saying, or other science fiction writers, people will say, oh, they're prophetic. And you get this sense of real confusion, sometimes even irritation. Someone like Margaret Atwood almost gets quite irritated, actually, because she's like, I'm not a prophet. I literally just read history. What the hell are you talking about? What? Like, none of this is what? And then you almost feel delusional because, like, everyone else is sort of like, oh, wow, you must just, and for you, you're just like, it's just like turning a tap to drink some water. Do you know what I mean? You're like, what? And that is the nature of being of delusion. Like I feel very privileged to know people who have schizophrenia, who have other psychosis, and who are willing to share with me, like, either how they talk to themselves to heal or how they kind of manage it. And so actually it's the same thing but in a different way, wherein they're often, what they're experiencing is actually a reflection of reality. Like, as an example, sorry, not to go on, but as an example, someone during because you mentioned the Cold War, it stuck in my head. Someone who was talking about how as a child he, would hear Russian voices and he would feel that he was being spied on by the Russians. And it got, obviously got bad now, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. But then actually when you think about it, it's like, no, but that was kind of real, because that's what he was being told by everyone, like on the newspapers, on the TV, in the films, at school. So what happens when someone actually is like, I'm being spied on? Suddenly they're the ones who are delusional, really? But that's what you're telling anyway. So it's, yeah, there's something about, you're not actually delusional, but you can feel like that. And then why not just own it then? Fine, we are delusional, let that be the case. But isn't it interesting? The delusional dreamer is the delusional realist. It's the one who actually understands how to make something work. The person who's like, quote unquote, crazy often is the one who actually knows how to fix the problems. Interesting.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. You've got me. I mean, it's a lot of us are we're playing what do they call it, the so-called devil's advocate, right? With all this delusion, this possible delusion, and we know we kind of know better, even the idea of prophecy. We know it's some type of pattern, some type of system, some type of. It's not always connected to divination in the true sense of it, like it just comes from on high out of nowhere. It comes from on high out of patterns, systems, ancestors, DNA, geography. Oh, it's going to rain. Oh my God. It's going to rain because the birds are moving, the trees are doing this, the cows are looking a bit like we don't want to get wet. So this is how we understand things. And it then made me think about, as you're talking, I'm thinking about Earthseed, I'm thinking about change as Olamina, as Lauren has put it. How many of us, again, this is sometimes just about the words and etymology and wordplay, how many of us would follow that as a religion? Not just as an idea that, oh yeah, I keep a bit of that since I read the book. Yeah, change changes me. Yeah, I get it. No, would you follow it? And would that then make it be the colonial thing that we're afraid of? Or could it still be a force for good in our lives? As much as we love her, you know, everyone that reads that book loves her in some way, shape, or form. But would she then turn into a you know, a matriarch, you know, in the way that we look down on patriarchs of different time periods? Because, you know, depending on who you are, Winston Churchill's a hero, right? And a legend, and one of the greatest military minds of his time, and the bulldog spirit. And for some other people, he's less so. So knowing that, would we follow those words in the same way? I'm putting that out to everybody here.
So we've got 15 minutes left. Anton, sure, if that was a one to share, definitely share. But I'm going to leave space, a little space in the last minute as well, just to see what's coming up for you. Because I know when things are being thrown at you, you kind of want to listen. Like I, for one, I'm kind of like listen. It doesn't give me a chance to like take it in and then respond. And people have been sharing their writings in the comments. You know, I've just kind of had peeks at them, and I want to catch up with them. So if you want to just take a couple minutes, I mean, just seeing Rennie's just now, thinking about how thinking about how the testimonies, parallels, knowing, dreams, delusions that Lauren builds and shares are so important. They keep her alive. What she was writing down and telling herself when she was living at her dad's house, talking about how she wasn't safe in the gated community, even though she was ignored and brushed off as overreactionary. So we're talking about the delusional part, and how important it was for her to stay alive, that she listened to that, prepared, acted, and shared her knowing. When it was shared, it came to life. It became a blueprint you're then on the journey with. And yeah, they're going to be thinking about imperialism and the choices for a long time. So yeah, there's a few excellent comments there. But if you want to share as well, then please do. I'm just going to read these for a minute.
Mark?
I'm going to say something real quick because I know that we're getting to that point. Hey everyone, my name is Mercedes. Thanks for having this event. Like it's major. It's 11:30 in the morning. I'm actually at work, but I'm at play right now with y'all. So the thing that really attracted me to this event was Octavia Butler. I'm a bit of a fangirl. I've read the book, like I don't even know how many times, but I haven't read it since COVID. And I think going back now would probably be even more impactful. But one of the things that kind of struck sharing their reflections is the idea of change. And that's what caught me when I opened the book, that quote, right? Everything that touches you, you change it, etc., and so forth. But also like how many people are afraid of change. That is the biggest fear. And we don't realize, just like every day we wake up, we're changed. Like you're not the same person that you were when you went to sleep last night. Whatever it was, you might have been not sober, you know what I'm saying? You might have been in a different mood. You might have been in a different location. You might have been with a different group of people. But moving forward, in whatever our goals are. I think we would have to definitely be aware of the fear that exists. If you believe in fear, I think it's false evidence appearing real. That's how I look at fear. But if you are fearful of change, then how close are you to planting that herb seed and landing in the stars? That's kind of where I've been resonating with this whole idea of like, yeah, you say you want change, but really, how much are you willing to embrace that change? Are you the person that's going to say, well, that's just how I am? I've always been like that. People know that that's how I am. Are you going to be willing to like just like make an effort and do something different, even if it makes you uncomfortable? And so that's something that I've been posing to myself, and to that end, most recently just jumped out of a plane to try to do something different in skydive. But just thinking about making yourself uncomfortable and having the courage to do things even when it might seem super weird, or neurodivergent, or whatever the word is, crazy or prophetic. And the last thing I would say, Florence, to your piece, I just want to like honor the ancestors really quick and talk about my grandmother as far as the visions. And I don't think it's delusional to speak on the fact that our folks know things that other people don't know. However you want to term it, right? We have certain things that I say it's a direct connect. And so when she would tell me certain things and they would come to pass, I started to realize that it's not like this hokey, maybe it'll be, no, like this is going to happen. Words have power to speak it into existence, but also you're in touch with the Most High. And so just thinking about, like wrapping it up, just thinking about the legacy of Octavia Butler. She was prophetic in the sense that she wrote things down. And many of you, I'm sure, have seen some of her writings, and she says, by this time I'm gonna do this, or my name's gonna be here, I'm gonna be published here, etc., and so forth. So we all have that same power to be able to speak our dreams into existence. And so I encourage all of us to continue to do that, like write it, visualize it, but act it and make it. So praying is not just putting your hands together, it's an action. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us to that. It gave me chills seeing that when I saw those notes. She's got so many. I don't know if everyone knows, but they've got those. She wrote all her thoughts down. What she wanted, and what you said about people being afraid of change. I saw something that said the cornerstone of work we're doing is behavior change. So the doing, and also connecting the dots of you're building new neural pathways as well. That's difficult. Like you get a lot of stress from in terms of the mechanisms of it. You're going to get a lot of stress in your body doing that, but then you've got the pathways and it becomes easier, and it becomes harder. But sitting with that discomfort is also something. If you're uncomfortable, then you're in the mode of change. And remembering, thank you for reminding us of that. I think we all need to keep reminding each other that even this is good. This means you're conscious. This means you're engaged with life and with yourself and with other people. You're trying. So thanks for that reminder. I've got a lot of reminders here, by the way. I've got so many pages here of notes. So I'm very, very thankful for everyone here commenting and sharing their thoughts as well. We've just got a few minutes left. So I'm happy to just sit and read these comments unless anyone wants to say anything, in which case please do. But I'm happy to just sit for a bit. So if anyone wants to speak, please do. But I'm gonna sometimes you can feel the need to fill silences. I do, but I'm gonna just be uncomfortable for a minute I'm gonna sit with that discomfort. Sorry, I just saw your question, Anton. You can please do share the link as reference to the event. Yes, I think so. Yeah. So yeah, we're reaching the end now. Yeah. So just want to say a huge thank you for everyone spending your Friday night here. Woohoo! or your 11 a.m. Working morning. Cool. It's food for thought, which is my whole thing. I love feeding my brain. Feels good, and especially with you guys, and especially when it comes to anything Butler related and Star Trek related. You can find me on I mean, my link is also on that resource page, but anything Afroflux related, if you follow Afroflux, we host these kinds of events, offline and online. And I've put links to Florence and Khadija and Juice as well, so you can find them. If you want people to find you, then do share your a link to your work or where you're at. Thank you for sharing thank yous as well. And we'll share the recording as well on that resource page. Unless I'm told otherwise, like speak now, forever hold you, hold your peace kind of thing. Yeah. This has been fantastic. I'll leave it on for a bit so you can say your thank yous. But that's it. You can go and have your dinner or uh get ready for bed or have your day. All right. Yes. Take it easy, everyone. Live long.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much.
Now I can finally get out of the car. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. It's just us, innit? Yeah, it's just us.